Welcome to Aspire to Lead, where we empower educators and school leaders to grow, inspire, and thrive. I'm your host, Joshua Stamper, author, speaker, and leadership coach, bringing you conversations that spark transformation, challenge the status quo in education, and equip you to make a lasting impact on your campus or in your district. For more information and resources, visit joshstamper.com as we're looking to ascend to new leadership heights together. All right, welcome back, Aspire Leaders. We are back again with a fantastic guest, educator, leader, author, Dr. Chris Jochum. Thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead.
Well, hey, thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
Oh my goodness. I am in love with your book, the subject matter. I'm so excited for this conversation. But before we begin, Chris, will you just share a little bit about your educational and leadership background?
Sure. Well, I started as a K-12 educator. I say K-12 because my first job was as a district ESL, what we called at the time, over 25 years ago, English as a second language teacher. And then I finished my career, the last 5 years, I was a high school Spanish teacher and, always had great mentors. Leadership was something that I was always interested in. And because of my mentors, was always kind of at the forefront of my thoughts and how I would interpret things. And then fast forward, here we are now. I chair a large teacher ed department at Fort Hays State University. Obviously, I'm a titled leader, but in my work with future teachers, current teachers, and those in K-12 over the last 5 years especially, just became really passionate about training up leaders at all level, certainly those who are in our K-12 schools.
Yeah, which is right in line with the topic for your book. Your book is titled "You Don't Have to Leave to Lead: A Practical Guide to Teacher Leadership," and I love this topic. I wrote a little bit about this in Aspire to Lead, but I mean, you have a whole book on it. So let's jump into it, because I think the first thing is the challenges that teachers have. This belief of, you have to leave the classroom to become a leader, and I want to know, what do you think fuels the just a teacher mindset in our profession?
Well, and I appreciate you said that. And I mentioned that in the book is, we, at any level that we lead, we're not just to anything, but certainly teachers. And I think what it is there's two sides to every coin. And I think teachers, what makes them awesome in the classroom is they are very other-centered. It's not about them. The other side to that coin, though, is they really sometimes underestimate themselves. And then you throw on top of that, traditionally, how schools are run in a way that has order, and we respect those that have formal authority and all of that, just like students. And in a classroom, teachers tend to do what's expected of them within the school and district. And so I think that just compounds to this mindset that, I'm not a leader. That's the superintendent. That's the principal. I'm quote unquote just a teacher. And so that's where that comes from. And, over the last 5-6 years, I kind of backed into teaching teacher leadership. And that was one of the first things that stood out to me. So early on, that was one of my main goals, was to really change that narrative among future teachers and even experienced teachers, that they are so much more than just a teacher. And in fact, they are probably the most influential people in the building, which, in a word, leadership is influence. And so that's where that came from. And that's why I continue to, as you said, hope teachers will understand they're more than just anything. They are a very well-educated professional that has many, many skills and can do things that I say normal humans cannot do.
So true. Couldn't agree more with that sentiment. I know that, we've got teachers all the way to superintendents listening to this podcast. And so I just want to know, regardless of the title, how can schools start to shift that narrative or mindset so that we don't have teachers feeling this way, and they can start to step out and start to, like you said, use all their tools and to influence the campus?
Well, the two things that I always like to do in my teaching, my speaking, whatever the topic, is I like to focus on permission and perspective. I like to, as a teacher, as a speaker, whatever, if I can give you something that changes your perspective in a way that then gives you permission to try something new, maybe stop doing something, just one thing. And I think with teacher leadership, and not to be too technical, but the research base, if you're into that, is pretty strong, that schools that promote this mindset and this practice of enabling teachers to see themselves and act as leaders, all of those things that matter to us, student success, morale, retention, those are all associated with going up. But I think ultimately it starts with a mindset of, as you said, teachers can do many, many things. And certainly those teachers that get into that second and third phase of their career, I think it's natural, and there's also some research to support this, that we want to start doing more and being challenged in different ways, but maybe we don't necessarily want to leave the classroom. And so I think that this mindset of what is teacher leadership, how can we promote a culture and climate where that's something that we quote unquote do in our schools in a way that gives teachers perspective and permission to stay in the classroom, but also be fulfilled in other ways, serving as a teacher leader, which in many ways is informal, but we can certainly capture that if people ask, what does that look like?
All right, I want to hone in on the individual teacher aspects. So you write in your book that teacher leadership is rooted in character, courage, and service. I'm just curious, in your findings, which one do teachers struggle with the most?
Oh, boy. In terms of training teachers to see themselves as the true leaders that they are, I would say the one aspect is courage, and not within the four walls of their classroom. It's courage to understand that they have what it takes to have tough conversations with parents, to have tough conversations with stakeholders, community members, the teacher next door that, is on the same third grade team as them. Because, Josh, it's important. We need great formalized leaders in our schools. Don't get me wrong. We need great teachers, but we also need great assistant principals, and superintendents. And, one of my hopes in this book is that those that are maybe on the edge of, should I stay in the classroom or go into formalized leadership for the right reasons, this will let them understand that they have the tools. And a lot of times the conflict is what we look at our principals and superintendents and say, you couldn't pay me enough to do that. It's usually when they have to do something hard. So I would say teachers are very, very courageous. What they do 180 some days a year takes courage. But I've also found that it is important that teachers can understand that everything that they do in the classroom that makes them an excellent teacher, be it with a kindergartner or a senior, those things can be used when you are addressing conflict and stepping into courageous moments with adults. So I would say courage on that question because of those reasons.
No, I love it. And I think I agree with you 100%. It's a safe space in our own four walls, but once you step out, there's a whole lot of unknown out there and a lot of experiences that haven't been actually completed. So I want to know kind of your thought process as far as the first steps that teachers can do to strengthen their leadership identity.
Well, the first thing is to understand, and when I write about this and when I speak and train, I use the word superpowers, and I mean that sincerely, because Fortune 500 companies spend a lot of money to train their formalized leaders. And they usually go to locations that most of us that were in K-12 really, we don't have professional development on nice golf courses, right? So they rightfully so, they bring in great people. And I quote one of them in my book. I actually use Brene Brown's definition of leadership because she's a leading voice, because Fortune 500 companies use her work to train leaders. And I make the case that the things that we ask our formalized CEOs to do, teachers do every day. It's not in the book, but when I speak, I actually show some job descriptions that we ask of high-level leaders outside of K-12. Teachers do those every day. So the first thing is to understand the skill set that you have as a teacher is, like you said, it is not just a teacher. You can do a lot of things. And I think understanding just how powerful that is and how much you are in control in terms of how you affect others and maybe how they affect you. I think that's the first step. And when I train people, that's really what I try to focus on, is that understanding of the skill set that you already possess that makes you a superstar compared to the average person on the street, and how you can lean into that to either enhance what you want to do in your classroom, or maybe begin to step out and look at other areas of influence within your building or district.
Right. So in your book, you talk about the power of a personal mission statement. I want to know what qualities make a mission statement truly transformative versus just another exercise for our teachers to do.
Okay. And thank you for asking it that way, because I think a lot of us have been wherever we work. We all have, strategic plans, mission statements, and that's great, but we need to actually be able to live those out. So first of all, the mission statement needs to be relevant to you as a person. It needs to sit at the intersection, that sweet spot of what we are good at, what we enjoy to do, and what we actually get paid to do, our profession. That's important. And most importantly, and this is more of a process, but the most important thing is it needs to answer questions about what you will do for others, how you will make them feel, and then what that'll enable them to go on and do for others and make others feel. And so the best mission statements, certainly among teachers, and I do this with students. So I've had hundreds of students and current teachers and admin write statements. 99.9% of the time, Josh, when they write their statement, I can tell they're an educator, but I can't tell what they teach or what they do, which is a great thing. They're there to serve kids through integrity, relationships, all of those great things. So it needs to really focus on the words matter. And I need to step back if I'm assessing a mission statement, whether it's individual or corporate, is I need to say, how is this going to make other people feel? What'll it enable them to do or to become? Because that's an insight into your organizational culture and climate. And teachers, your classroom, that's your organization. So it matters whether you're in the classroom, department level, building level, or district level.
So, Chris, I want to reference something you said earlier, which was the fact that, sometimes teachers see leadership and they think, oh, I got to have some really uncomfortable conversations with adults. I'm great with kids, but I don't really know if I want to work with older people and deal with the uncomfortableness of all that. So how can teachers respond to conflict without harming relationships or undermining their influence?
Well, I would say that, and teachers listening, you understand this. If I were the teachers that are listening, and if I were to say, hey, I need you to come talk to my classroom management course, I'll bet you early on, one thing that you would impart on new teachers is address the behavior, not the person, right? I think we all agree about that, right? Kids are kids. They're not bad kids. They make some bad decisions. They do some things they shouldn't. But I think every teacher that's been doing it for a while understands I'm going to address the behavior and try to, maintain the relationship. It's the same thing. It is the same thing. And when I have worked with teachers that are struggling with conflict with, the large human, so to speak, I ask them, what would you do if your middle school student were displaying this behavior? And without thinking, they say, well, I would say, Josh, I noticed you did this. Unfortunately, that's unacceptable. Here's what we need to do moving forward. And I just look and I say, yep, that's what you can do. And I've done this many times, and they almost pause for a couple seconds and they're like, oh yeah, they don't have to be a 12-year-old or 13-year-old student. I could do that with an adult. And it doesn't mean you're demeaning. It's the same concepts. You're addressing the behavior. What's the situation? What's the behavior? And what do we want to see moving forward? And so that's what I would tell them, is utilize that toolbox that you have. You have been trained to influence and teach human beings, not just little human beings, but human beings. And so again, that's where I always talk to them about having those tough conversations, is you can do that with your colleagues, with your parents, community members. Address the behavior, address the problem, don't make it personal. And above all, always realize that you are a 24/7 billboard of who you are as a professional educator. And so the way you treat others is a reflection of your character, your integrity, and your courage.
All right. So maybe there's a teacher listening right now and they're like, you know what, this makes sense to me. I feel like I could have more influence on my campus or in my district, but I'm struggling with time.
Mhm.
Time is an issue, and this is something that comes up. I know you see this
Yes.
too, Chris. As far as like, I want to, have an influence on climate and culture of our campus, but I feel like I don't have enough time, or there's too much on my plate. So, for those folks that are listening that maybe have that perspective, what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, a realization that teaching is hard because it's hard. Okay. Second of all, to use the analogy plate, which I completely understand and agree that there's more on teachers' plates than ever. What I would say is, everyone listening, your district probably has a high school somewhere that has a weight room. And I don't think that anyone in the district is still questioning if it is worthwhile to ask our athletes to eat nutritious food and lift weights, because we know that in many ways that makes them stronger, and it makes that their proverbial plate stronger, right? And so as a teacher, it's hard because it's hard, but there are some things that if you want to either take things off your plate or strengthen the plate upon which things rest, when you work on yourself, because leadership development starts with yourself, and then it's how do I influence others. So one thing that you could do is pick one thing. If you look at the book or even the table of contents, there's many things, but it could be, I need to get better at addressing tough conversations. And then just pick one thing that you're going to lean into and you're going to learn about. And in this day and age, it's your podcast is one of many great podcasts where they can learn about almost anything they want to learn about as a leader. And just like we would tell you at the beginning of the year for PD, pick one new instructional strategy, and at the end of the year, you'll be 180 times better at it. Pick one thing, and maybe it's a phrase you're going to use. Maybe it's a way of thinking. Maybe it's an internal phrase that you're going to tell yourself before you would normally react and, do those things that give you anxiety and conflict. So I don't know if that directly addresses it, Josh, but
Yeah.
that's what I would say, is pick one thing and realize you are strengthening who you are as an educator. So not that that's an excuse to just bulk up our teachers so we can put twice as much on their plate. But I do think this is important enough because we work on ourselves personally first. And then
Yep.
that the default is that affects how we work with others.
Yeah, if we're looking to build new habits, I mean, first step is to make it easy. So
Correct.
you're not going to throw
Correct.
a huge buffet on that plate to
Correct.
begin with.
Exactly.
Baby steps. All right, so I'm going to have the link in the show notes for everyone, because I definitely want everyone to check this out. Beautiful resource. You don't have to leave to lead. Practical guide to teacher leadership. And before we move into that actionable step, Chris, for those teachers who are listening, I do want to touch on a couple projects that you have going on. So the first off, the Department Chair Leadership Podcast.
Correct.
I got to know, what's this podcast all about, and why did you create it?
Well, I created it about 5-6 years ago. I wrote a book on leadership to help university leaders, because you become a principal in K-12, you get some training, right? You get a master's degree, and there, unfortunately, the research says in higher ed, the training is just kind of depends. So I started the podcast as a way to reach out to those that were looking at leadership in higher ed. And because of my background, I realized early on that 99% of my influences in leadership that help me in higher ed are my friends and colleagues in K-12. Because, what I've told many superintendents and principals is, what you deal with by Wednesday, I may not see in a year or 2 years. I mean, you are on the ground floor of solving people problems. So over the last couple of years, it's really branched out to where it still says Department Chair Leadership Podcast, because I think that's an important area we need. But anybody who is in educational leadership, I think there's something for you. I've even had a few people from the corporate space in there. So as you asked before, what's one thing a teacher could do? Come up with a topic, and whether it's, Josh's podcast or mine, it doesn't have to be necessarily related to K-12. It could be, how does the CEO of a bank address this issue? And I promise you, because you're a teacher, you are better than most people at taking something and making it work in your own world. So longer answer probably than you wanted, Josh, but that's how the Chair podcast started.
No, I love that answer. And I love the idea of people being able to find other topics and other podcasts and other avenues of education and bridge it to what they're doing in their everyday life, because I think that's so true in the world of education. So you brought up your other book, The Department Chair, A Practical Guide to Effective Leadership. We just give a little Cliff Note version of what folks can check out in that book?
Yeah. And, it's leadership is leadership. So 85% of it would be relevant, even if you're, not in higher ed. Big picture, it is a very practical approach to where if you are in higher ed and you're looking at getting into formalized leadership, I'm going to walk you through some important questions, going to share some research with you because that's important. But again, it's just a straightforward approach, developing yourself first personally, so then you can develop into a better leader. So if you're in higher ed, know somebody that is, or you're just like to read leadership from various areas, I feel pretty confident that there's something in there that will add value to you.
Perfect. All right, Chris, let's get to that really important question, because it's great that folks are listening to the podcast and hopefully they're taking notes and grabbing your resource. But if there's something they can do tomorrow or next week to enhance their leadership journey, what would you recommend?
First of all, the realization that you, especially as a K-12 educator, you are a wonderfully equipped leader. And compared to other professions, you are doing things every day that leaders don't intuitively do. So if there's one thing, I would find a definition of leadership that makes sense to you. If there's somebody you already read or listen to, whatever that is, I offer a couple in my book. And then just spend some time reflecting. Think about how often on a daily basis you're courageous for others. How often on a daily basis you have to rely on procedures and expectations, all of those things. And I think if you start there, it's like, we've all heard the red car theory. You don't know how many red cars there are until you go looking. I promise you, once you start looking for all the opportunities that you are serving as what others would call a formalized leader, I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. And then, the next steps would be to, pursue different aspects of that interest you, be it listening to podcasts, reading. Certainly my book would be a great resource, but start by recognizing all of the great things you're already doing as a leader.
Awesome. All right. So I've been flashing up your website as we've been having this conversation for those who are watching on YouTube, but beyond your website, is there any way that folks can connect with you on social media?
Sure. I have the typical social media handles, LinkedIn, TikTok, and those are on the website. The other thing, you can send me an email. My email address is chris@cjleadership.com. So either head to my website, that will have all of the things that we've talked about today and more, or you can just shoot me an email at chris@cjleadership.com.
Perfect. And we've got it. I didn't say it. I probably should for my audio listeners, but cjleadership.com is your website. Of course, I will have all this information in the show notes. I'll have the link to Chris's books, to his podcast. So that way you can connect with him, not only on social media, but consume the various resources that he has to offer. Chris, man, I am so excited that we got to connect today. I love hearing about your leadership journey, but also this wonderful resource for teacher leadership, and so excited to see the work that you're doing, because I know that you're working with districts, you're speaking, you've got the various books and your podcast. So you're just doing some phenomenal work, and I'm just so honored to have this conversation with you today.
Well, hey, likewise, thank you for the work that you do, and it was an honor and a privilege to be part of your podcast.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at www.teachbetterpodcastnetwork.com. We'll see you on the next episode.